Welcome to Roundabout Oxford, a podcast from the University of Mississippi Libraries.
Hello, I'm Carmen Sanchez Garcia, cataloger at the University of Mississippi. And this time, on Roundabout Oxford, I interviewed Dr. Sara Wellman on her research interest and teaching. Dr. Sara Wellman is a French professor at the University of Mississippi who teaches French culture, French language, and 17th and 18th century French literature, specifically environmental literature.
It's a pretty huge category of literature, actually. So for me, environmental literature is any kind of text, fictional or non-fictional, that in some way deals with the relationship between humans and nature. So it can be a text that talks about a natural disaster, a text that talks about human impact on the natural environment, deforestation, climate change, pollution. I'm also really interested in texts that present kind of a really idealized version of the natural world that humans can kind of escape into. It was with these sort of idealized environmental texts that my interest in this kind of literature started.
Dr. Wellman's interest in environmental literature started in graduate school when she studied the correspondence between Madame de Montainville and her friend, a cousin of Louis XIV.
I was fascinated by this correspondence with her friend because they sort of started out talking about how many constraints on women there were at this time. And these were two noble women. So for context, they had a lot of privileges that most women in 17th century French society didn't have. But the particular constraint that these two women were concerned with was the lack of freedom to kind of choose your path in life and this obligation to marry whoever your male relatives said you should marry. And they needed this kind of natural space free from all these cultural constraints. Nature was kind of this resource for them that allowed them to imagine this more free space where they could just spend their lives reading, discussing literature, going for walks, cultivating friendships. So I trace my interest in environmental literature back to that correspondence.
The French environmental literature of the 17th century tapped a rich tradition of pastoral literature, dating back to ancient Rome.
In 17th century France, pastoral literature was extremely popular, and that's actually been one of my main research interests. Pastoral literature didn't start in the 17th century. It goes back to ancient Greek and Roman authors like Virgil and Theocritus. Already back in classical literature, authors were writing about this kind of idealized nature that represented a little bit of an escape from and critique of various aspects of the society that they were living in.
A passionate professor, Dr. Wellman brings insights from her research into the classroom.
I teach two classes that are really directly drawn from my research interests. One of them is a class called The Environment in French and Francophone Literature. And we look at French and Francophone texts from different historical periods and different parts of the French-speaking world. The second class is a study abroad class that I was able to teach for the first time this past summer. And it's called Green Paris, Past and Present. And so very kind of similar structure. We start in the 17th century and we visit some green spaces, some gardens that were created in Paris.
Dr. Wellman's research on one French author led her here to archives and special collections on the third floor of J.D. Williams Library.
One author that I've been interested in recently, like in my current research, is Louis-Sébastien Mercier, 18th century French author. In 1771, he published a utopian novel called The Year 2440. So in this utopian novel, he imagines Paris of the 25th century. And I've been interested in this novel because 25th century Paris is very green. He also wrote a lot about 18th century Paris, and among the problems that he wanted to be addressed in 18th century Paris was unequal access to green spaces and fresh produce and sunlight and clean water, depending on social class. So it's not surprising then that in this utopian novel, in his vision of the future, everybody has like unrestricted access to green spaces, and the government really like prioritizes caring for these spaces, and everybody knows how to grow fruits and vegetables, and everybody has a rooftop garden. And so I've been really interested in this text, and I discovered that we have an 18th century edition of this text. So the novel was originally published in 1771, and we have a 1775 edition in the archives here. So I was super excited to discover that we had this 18th century copy. And so I went in and took a look at it, and there's something really powerful about like just holding this 18th century text, and he dedicates the novel to the future, to the kind of readers of the future. And so we're not in the 25th century yet, but 21st century, and sort of reading him writing to the readers of the future, and to be able to sit there and just hold this 18th century edition was pretty awesome.
As we conclude our interview, Dr. Wellman reflects on the role humanities can play in confronting the environmental challenges of the 21st century.
Obviously the sciences have a huge role to play as we try to kind of navigate the human-nature relationship in the 21st century, but the humanities have a role to play as well, and can give us a lot of information about how people use nature and how they interact with it. And literature has the power to kind of change our attitudes towards the natural world and maybe offer us different perspectives. And so, recently I've been really interested in this question of urban nature, especially in 18th century France.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me and for talking to me today. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
Roundabout Oxford is created by Brian Corrigan, Michael Carelse, Carmen Sanchez Garcia, Joe Moody, and Alex Watson, with musical contributions from Brian Corrigan and Gail Herrera.